a couple years now. So this is so great,
So
honestly.
I started recording now. Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Um, so maybe let me backtrack a little bit on why I came to California when I did. Um, I am a single mother of three. My oldest is 26 now, and I have another son who is 22, and my daughter is 17, going to be 18 in September. And I moved out here 7 years ago, October of 2012. And what happened prior to that, about a year and a half prior to me moving out here, I lost a job. And I lost my job in a very humiliating, painful way. And so I spent a year and a half kind of reevaluating my life, questioning my worth, really deep in depression and mental health breakdown. Now, throughout that entire experience, I was in therapy and on medication. So I was doing what I knew how to do to get better. I was involved in a church community, and it was the same church community I'd been at for like 15 years. And they were losing patience with me, no doubt. My father was deceased at this time, and my mom was very ill, so there was very little support from my family. I have siblings who don't have kids, so they never related to the struggle that I had as a single mom who had come out of an abusive relationship. So they don't understand this. And I actually didn't, I knew I was really sick. And I knew that it was going to be very hard for me to um, rehabilitate and be ready for, kind of a professional experience. And since my doubt of myself was so fundamental, I knew that it was going to be nearly impossible to shake in a job training program or job interviews. So I knew I needed help. And so I experienced that difficult place where I needed help, but I couldn't ask for it in an appropriate way because I was so sick. So I needed people in my life that were tolerant and understanding of what mental health crisis looks like. And I needed them to be patient with the needs that I voiced. And I think one thing that I told my family over and over again was that I needed sanctuary. I needed a place where I could heal, where there was very minimal demands upon me personally, that I could have some privacy and dignity in a shared experience. Like it was in my heart to help people, but I didn't know how to help them in a healthy way. And for me, I used my sense of humor, my wit, and my desire to help as currency to engage and get relationships. And I didn't see that as a negative thing at all. I mean, I see that as a somewhat unhealthy thing now, but that's what I had. So I knew being jobless, I wasn't going to be able to support my kids anymore. I gave up custody to their father, and my two younger ones went to live with their dad and their stepmom in Claremont, California. Now, I didn't give up custody in a way that limited my access. But when I came out, which I eventually came out because I didn't have a job, and that might not make any sense to anybody. So let me explain that. Why come to California with no job and no ability to support yourself? I knew that if I tried in the city that pretty much had evaluated me, and it was a small town enough that I knew I was always going to run into somebody who thought they knew me or had heard something about me, and that it was going to be a challenge that I just personally knew that I couldn't navigate. And that I wanted to be near my kids. I knew they were safe and supported, and I needed a fresh start. I needed to be somewhere where nobody knew me, that I could have a blank slate and build from there. So I came out, and I did some couch surfing and stayed with some people. I surprised my family members. I haven't, my uncle just passed away, but my aunt and uncle lived in Altadena at the time. And I just showed up at their house. I did have some shelter with them. But this is one of the things that I think is the most important, particularly for the mentally ill that are homeless. Families are easily triggered by them. And if you have any sort of history there, a lot of families are like, well, you get what you deserve. You made this bed. Now you have to lie in it. And if you're going to get out of the situation, you have to figure it out. I'm not going to figure it out for you. And so, my family just summarily rejected me. They believed anything negative about me, like I'm in their home, I might be stealing from them. What I'm asking is inappropriate. My presence absolutely unwanted. Um, and let me give you I just want to highlight, because had they given me sanctuary for a period of time, there is a shelter in Pasadena that does help rehabilitate people who are mentally ill, particularly women. And I could have gotten on their waiting list and had shelter and not had all the interim kind of traumatic experiences that I had. So one of the things I've gotten out of this is families need people to help bridge the gap with their mentally ill family members. And I think that will prevent a lot of trauma and help families, reconnect. And thankfully, I'm reconnected with all my family members in a healthy way. And honestly, that was my doing. I initiated all of it. And I think it's very hard. What I encountered once I became homeless and was part of these shelters was just a common story of families that have given up on these people, and a real profound lack of faith in themselves to overcome the situation. And I've never been to prison. I don't know what that's like, but it kind of felt like when we were all together, it was sort of a prison situation where there was hierarchies and relationships and alliances, and people being given preferential treatments, and also being suspicious of you. I don't know what information you guys have, but just my loose anecdotal understanding was that about 99% of the women that are out there, single women, not moms, are raped. If they're homeless, they've been raped. And so I started seeing kind of like how rape trauma sort of, I guess it colored their behavior. Like, oh, that explains it. They've been a victim of rape. That explains why they have very specific bathing routines that they have to do and that no one can interfere with. So you can imagine if they weren't able to get the amount of time that they wanted in the bathroom, that it was going to trigger them. I saw that a lot. So the shelters that I was in, the reason I ended up in them was the various couch surfing situations and people that I was around. They just, again, were fed up with me, didn't know how to help support me without feeling very threatened. So right before Christmas, 2012, I found myself homeless. And I didn't know, but in California, that's when the shelters open up. They open up mid-December, I believe. And had I become homeless back in October, I would have been sleeping in my car. And a lot of communities in California have the sidewalk fines, so unless you have access to the internet and can do some research, you don't know where you can stay legally. The first night I stayed overnight in Claremont, I got like a $65 ticket. And I had no money. So that was, impossible. So I just tucked that one away. So my first night was at a Santa Ana shelter, and honestly, it felt like a huge relief. That was the first time I felt like, okay, I don't have to explain myself to everyone and justify everything about my choices and why I find myself feeling so unhealthy and unable to actually be scrappy enough to get a job, if that makes sense. So I was in that shelter for a while. Serendipitously, I found out that there was a shelter in Pomona that was close to my kids. So I ended up staying there. And then I was able to start establishing a visiting routine with my kids, and I found a church to be involved with, and that's ultimately how I met Aaron. So let's pull up. Do you have any questions about my shelter experience?
I have a quick question.
Okay.
What would have made the experience better? Like, what could they have done at the shelter to make it better?
In that particular environment, I kind of liken it to some sort of bizarre love boat experience. You know, you're on this homeless cruise from December to February, and the men and women are together. And there's one shower, and sometimes the men have their hour and women have theirs. And the way it was set up, the women had to walk through the men's section to get to the showers. And that was so traumatic, I ended up not bathing. One time I was in there completely naked, and a man tried to get in. So there's some crazy stuff that happens between these single men and women in these shelters, and they need to be separated. I saw women who had, one in particular, she was a grandmother. Her kids wanted her to live with them, but she had a homeless boyfriend, so she opted for the street. And when the shelter closed down, most people just went back to their little patch of dirt on the ground somewhere in Pomona. You know, they didn't go to the shelter opportunities that were available, which I thought was bizarre. I didn't understand why anybody wouldn't want to be helped. And that kind of goes back to that feral cat thing. There is a mission in Orange, I think it's called the Orange County Mission and it's in Orange County. It's near Tustin, I believe. And I went and interviewed there. And they have this thing where they interview you, but if you're going to stay with them, if they are going to include you, they notify you. So if they're not going to include you, you get ghosted. So there's that waiting period, and then all of a sudden, I'm not being heard from at all. My daughter just walked in the room. She wants to tell me something. I can hear it in her countenance.
It went well. There wasn't a lot of back and forth questioning.
She just applied for a job, her first.
He just wanted to see me, and I wanted to give him an application, and then he's gonna call me, and I have to do training in Riverside, and he's gonna call me for an interview so we can actually talk one-on-one.
Nice.
And
high five.
Sabrina, and she was like, you looking all professional, and you actually going to the place is actually really good, because not a lot of teenagers do that. So that made me so
yay. Alrighty, I'm going to continue my meeting, okay?
Okay, I love you.
I love you, bye. She's excited. She might, it looks like she's going to work at the Jack in the Box across the street. This is her first job. So, yay. Back to that getting ghosted. Yeah, everybody in my family, I told them about it. We were really excited. And there are a couple stipulations. I had to be willing to have no contact with anybody outside of the shelter for 6 months. I think the way I interpreted that was that's kind of the feral cat phenomena. If people are going to commit to the program that they had, then they had to cut off ties to their routines, their expectations, their autonomy, at least for a period of time. And I respect and understand that, because a lot of these people, they have their alliances out on the street, and and that's their backup plan. That's their only backup plan. And so to cut themselves off from that, they have to trust you. And I think that there's equal amounts of distrust of that person, and distrust from that person to the whatever company or entity is trying to help them. I didn't get in. I never found out why. I've surmised that it was because I was mentally ill and I was on medication, and they don't support anybody on medication there. So the ideal candidates are people who are have become jobless, families, addicts even, who aren't on any medication. My feeling is there are people in the scenario who are on medication that are trying to get better, and there are people who need medication. It's kind of like there's mental illness is so much an integral part to homelessness and being in that crisis that most people need that support, whether it's therapy or medication. They need it, at least during that time as they heal. There was something else I wanted to say about that experience. So yeah, that's traumatic. One thing that happens over and over again was that people ask why I was homeless. So I get, whatever opportunities I'd have to sit and be interviewed, and they would ask, the basic questions: why are you homeless? They'd ask about my work experience, my kids, all kinds of stuff. And after a while, answering those same questions and having to revisit the destruction of my life, all my failures, was terrible. And I avoided those situations, especially the ones that could have been helpful. And I kind of feel like people in crisis sort of need a crisis resume, something that's written out, that they can just give to people. Here's my background. Why don't you check it out? If you have any questions? And people need help sorting that out, but they don't want to revisit it every time. It's very traumatic. I think that covers it. Did that cover some of your ideas about what would be needed?
Okay. One other question is, you said that there was it was really hard to find trust within just in general within the community, right?
Yeah.
I'd love to know more about that.
Well, I don't know if this is what you're thinking of, but one situation comes to mind. I would try to find places to worship every now and then, churches to go to in Orange County. And I went to this church, and I could tell that they were a very vibrant community. And my experience with church is like, hey, afterwards, why don't you come over and have something to eat? Let's get to know each other. Just like an instant trust. That was extended. And so that was my personal experience. And I knew, because I wasn't a criminal, I had kids, I used to work with children, that there was no reason for them to distrust me. So I started talking to some people. I was a very attractive young woman. I'm still attractive. Okay, let's not be negative that way, but I was really attractive at that time. So I got a lot of attention from men. I was real skinny. I dyed my hair. I had fashionable clothes. So I could go into these situations and kind of front, stability and health. And I even had some designer glasses that people would notice, so it wasn't like I was trying to trick anybody. I had some stuff, I had a wardrobe when I became homeless. So I go to this church, and they want to welcome me into their community of young, beautiful people. And I was like, yay, I'm accepted. Like, you have that sense, that feeling that people are welcoming. And then afterwards, I was like, well, here's my situation. I'm living in my car, blah, 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 blah. And then immediately just vroom, and the barrier went up. And at that point, they weren't really interested in connecting with me, that helping me in that. I had a very specific need. I didn't have any money at all. A lot of the homeless, once they get into the food stamp and general welfare scenario, they get $200 a month. I didn't have that at all. Any money I had for gas or non-food items like, I don't know, soap, laundry soap or whatever, I didn't have any of it. So when I needed help, I really needed help. And I was hoping, I was like, well, does anybody want to get together with me? We can hang out. I need to do a little bit of laundry. It'd be great if you guys could help me out with that. So the person I was talking to went to talk to their people, and then they got back to me eventually. It was weird. Like I waited outside, then I was standing in the parking lot, then I came back in. I was like, is anybody gonna talk to me? What's going on? So finally, the pastor, like the big gruff guy, comes out, and he's like, okay, here's what we can do for you. And he hands me a roll. He says, we're going to meet you at this fast food place. We'll see you in like 20 minutes or whatever. So we go to this fast food place and they hand me a roll of quarters and are like, would you like something to eat? And I was like, sure, that would be great. And so they bought me some food and then we sat down. So this is what we're willing to do. Here's quarters. Good luck. And, you're welcome to come back and worship with us anytime, kind of thing. But I was like, wow, they just summarily were like, we don't want to hang out with you. We're suspicious that you even want to do that with us. And you can't come to our homes. That's it. That always surprised me, especially from church people, that to be confronted with their lack of trust in me, just immediate. And I think that's just kind of a systemic California thing. I think other churches are not like that, to be honest. It seems to be a California phenomenon, or anywhere else that has like a resentful attitude connection with their homeless community. Does that help? Justin, I think you were the one with that question. Did that amplify that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. Really did.
Okay. Awesome. So any other questions about that time in my life? Because I have a lot of ideas about how I became rehabilitated.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I really wanted to know how's it in the shelter? What's the process of getting into like,
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird finding out where to go, what it is. A lot of it is other homeless people spotting you and being like, and you sort of have that mutual understanding, and then you start asking, okay, where do you getting food? Is there any place around here I can get help? And you kind of find out through observation and talking to people who seem to obviously be in the same scenario. And that's how I found out about the shelters. I had an iPhone at the time and I had unlimited data. So I would ask for money from people to keep me on my phone plan because that's how I got information. So I did a lot of searches. Most of the shelters have sort of a first come, first serve phenomenon, and it starts at around 5 o'clock. So you just have to be there and you have to wait in line. And what I found for me at the Pomona shelter was that I didn't want to wait in that line. I'd go late because I did not want to hang out with those people. They're very unhealthy, conflict-based bunch. And a lot of them are not allowed to bring alcohol in the shelter, so they all come blazing drunk because that's the last alcohol they're going to get until they're booted out in the morning. So yeah, you can imagine what that's like, waiting in line with a bunch of drunk men. It was bad. I was, this attractive young woman. I had to, I stopped bathing for a while. I was like, maybe if I smell terrible, they'll just leave me alone. Yeah, that was a constant problem for me, is unwelcome interactions with men. So they interview you, but they don't interview right away. It's more about you telling you what you can and can't bring in and what their expectations are of you. And eventually you get a chance to do some intake. It really depends on the shelter. And they just want, if you have ID, they want to know who you are. It's sort of documenting. I think a lot of that is for funding, so they can keep track of their population and give that data back for funding. I think that they're definitely tied in together. Does that answer that question?
Yep, pretty much. So they interview you, like kind of interview you, but not. And then you have a room. How many people in the room?
The places that I were at were armories. So they were these big gymnasiums. In Santa Ana, they have this huge gymnasium. It has a gymnasium floor, and I'm trying to remember how they distributed the mats. I believe the mats were already laid out at the Santa Ana one, so you just went and found a spot. At the one in Pomona, they had cots. They had wooden cots, which is really nice. You weren't on a mat on the floor, so you could actually sit on it with your legs dangling. I know that may sound strange, but that's a big difference than, just being on the floor. Because you could put your stuff underneath you, kind of had a sense of being able to establish a little spot. Always first come, first serve. Most of the time, you can't leave your stuff there. At Pomona, they made it such that you could set up a bed, and as long as you were willing to commit to coming back and you showed consistency with your arrival and everything, that you could leave your stuff in a specific location and know that it was going to be available to you when you got back.
And of course, there is no.
Is that good? Anything?
Yeah, there is no like something.
Go ahead.
Like, something like drapes on the bed. Nothing like this. Just no privacy at all.
No, and the bathroom was obviously gross. It was gross. It wasn't dirty per se, but it wasn't like a place you want to spend any real amount of time with. Two experiences there that I thought were of note, especially in light of coronavirus. There was a bug that went around, and I figured out that it was being transmitted from the drinking fountain, which was where I would go and fill my water bottles every day. And you're not necessarily thinking, oh, I got to go wash my hands after I've touched this drinking fountain. But I'm pretty certain it went through the entire community from the fountain. And it was a throw up / diarrhea bug. So that was probably one of my worst moments as a homeless person, having to find some place to go to the bathroom immediately and having some place to vomit. It was crazy. And we would be, there's no sick place. There's no little, you can stay here for the day because you're sick kind of phenomenon. I had to go hang out in my car and find a restroom that I had to stay near in order to endure that and get better. Otherwise, a lot of the women got up at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and went in the bathroom that we had available and would do all of their, personal prep. And then they just go back to bed until the morning when we all had to leave. I was like, I can sit in my car and brush my teeth and brush my hair. I don't need to do anything. So I would do my best to get a good night's sleep because I knew that was the most important to getting through the next day. While I was there was this one lady who really, really big and scary. And she would go in the bathroom and she had her routine and nobody could get around her. There was one little sink and people needed to be able to just wet their toothbrush or spit, She wouldn't even let people, she had her thing. Nobody was going to talk her out of it. And I finally went to talk to some of the supervisors there. And I was like, I think she has a problem that she needs help with. And she's causing a problem for everybody else who just needs to get in the bathroom and get their brush her teeth and get out. She's taking like an hour. Now, an hour is all the time you have. They wake you up at 7 or 6 and you have to be out by 7. She pretty much dominated the bathroom at night before bed and then in the morning. And it was so problematic. And she was so scary, nobody challenged her. So I talked to the supervisors and I was like, look, I think she just needs a basin of water and some privacy. If you guys can just get her a basin of water, maybe a basin of clean water and a basin where she can spit, so she, that kind of thing. And she just needs time. And, if there's a spot where she can go that you can give her some privacy, everybody else could have access to the bathroom. But it didn't occur to me to advocate for her like that until right before the shelters closed. So, yeah, that's a lot of the craziness that happens there and the lack of privacy. I know that there are some other shelters that really do give you, more of a sense of here's your room, here are your roommates, but I never experienced that.
And maybe the last question I will have, do they give any food or you just have to leave at 7 and that's it?
So the food situation, every evening there were, almost always there was a volunteer group that would come in and prepare meals and serve meals. And then they would offer, a lot of them were Christian organizations, so they'd offer to pray for you. And I always knew that if I came in, there was going to be a meal. One of the things that they didn't have in the meal was protein. It was all carbs. Very occasionally there was some salad, but at night they had they had this huge vat of expired Girl Scout cookies. I'd never seen such a huge amount of Girl Scout cookies, and they were so expensive. I just looked at that big box and started calculating. I'm like, that's like $1,000 worth of cookies. And they would distribute all these snacks at night. And I knew eating all these carbs, it's going to make me feel terrible. You know, you need protein and you need vegetables to feel okay. And there was none of that, or very rare amounts of it. And in the morning, sometimes they'd have a packed lunch that people, typically volunteers, would pack for you. It was always a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a piece of fruit most of the time. And they did have coffee, first come, first serve. That was about it. I mean, I didn't have food stamps at the time because I wasn't a California resident. I didn't get my driver's license, which you need to qualify for services. And even then, I had a nice car. So basically the state of California expected me to sell my car so that I could feed myself. And then, you know, in California, you have to have your car. For whatever reason, I knew that I had to hang on to my car for dear life, that was going to be how I was going to re-enter society, and I wasn't going to give it up. But I didn't have any money at all, so I depended on them every day for food. And so I ate like peanut butter and jelly and pasta. That was my diet for, let's see, I'm going to calculate how many months. It was December, January, February, March. So it was 3 to 4 months, and that's when the shelters close. So that put me in a position where I was like, okay, now what do I do? I was involved in my church at this point. I started becoming involved with them in January, and they're limited, you know. I had to establish a kind of a reputation in the community. They needed to know me and be familiar with me, I guess. And that was pretty funny because I experienced the same sort of suspicion about me there that I had experienced just about everywhere else, which I kind of expect Christians to be a little different, you know, a little more understanding about it. But, you know, I was in conflict with a lot of my family and with a lot of these organizations that wanted to help, but, you know, didn't really understand how to interact with someone who was mentally ill. And I certainly didn't know how to behave properly. One of the reasons that my relationships broke down was like that this internalized shame and fear and failure that I had. Like I was felt completely unworthy of any assistance that might be given to me, and whatever was offered, I kind of clung to in desperation. And you can imagine someone who clings to the help that you're offering desperately, it sets up a very unhealthy interaction because they don't know you and they don't know how far you're going to take that desperation. And when you feel desperate, whether or not you're a manipulative person, whether or not that's a problem for you, you become manipulative. Like, you know, you start thinking, okay, what information can I give them in order for them to give me the help that I know that I need? And if I'm asking for something, what can I ask for that I think they might be able to give me? And then once they give that to me, I'll just add on a few other things and see how that plays out. A lot of people felt like, well, why didn't you just ask me for that straight up? And being desperate, it's not a hierarchical thinking. You have no executive function. If you did, you'd operate in society a little better, you know. I know my experience was unique to me, but there was some commonalities between my experience and the other people. one thing I'd like to say about what they all have in common, all homeless people that I encountered, was they had a traumatic event that led to their homelessness, and they had their support system was either non-existent or had broken down altogether. So I knew that those were the two things that needed to be changed in order for me to sustain non-homelessness. So this seems to be about the time where I start talking about how Aaron's in my life. Are we ready for that?
I have one quick question.
Okay.
One of the things that I look forward to learning more about or figuring out in some way is, I get this feeling like if you put a whole bunch of mentally ill people together in the same space, that creates an unstable space. But at the same time, there's only certain destinations where you can focus on healing. I'm curious if you have any thoughts on how to make a more stable space, or if you saw anything related to this that would be useful for us to know, because just having a sense of stability when there's a lot of people being invited who feel less stable, how to create that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to tell you a little, an incident that happened that came to mind, and then I'm going to go deeper into what I think helps provide what homeless people need kind of to build trust and have faith in the world again, There was one night, there was a schizophrenic man who started to scream out, and the whole community woke up. A woman that I had been friends with, she thought it was the man that she was convinced was going to come and kill her. She started freaking out and was burrowed down in her sleeping bag or whatever, her blankets, and she actually had a razor, like a woman's razor. Like she was dramatic. It wasn't a real threat of self-harm, but and I don't mean to sound flippant about it. That's what I knew about this person. I got to know her very well. But we were all standing around or sitting up in our beds listening to this schizophrenic man. And I tell I used to work at a mental health hospital for the VA. Actually, that was my last job. So I'm very familiar with the mentally ill. And so it didn't faze me at all. I knew that he was having an episode where he was just unable to stop himself from crying out. And I could see him, he was standing there, and every now and then he would just yell out something, usually some swear words, but mostly nonsense. There was nothing really happening, but he was unable to control what he was doing. And we just all, what are you going to do about it? I mean, it's something going to happen. We were all a little on edge and afraid, but I knew that this man just needed peace and understanding. And what was nice is the security people, all the supervisors there, they just stood and they waited. They gave him the time and space to calm down. The police were not called. And eventually everything just died down and everybody went back to their separate areas. So you are right. There's a lot of stuff, kind of simmering under the surface when you have all these mentally ill people together. It is the worst to bring them all together and put them in a room, in my experience. This is why a lot of people opt to stay alone out in the elements. That being in these environments, which again, I liken to sort of a prison experience. It is traumatic, absolutely. That TV show, Orange is the New Black, became popular after I had been in that shelter. And I tried to watch it because it was like the thing to watch. And I couldn't. It just triggered me in every way. I was like, this is awful. I don't want to know anything about these women. And the way they're relating to one another is so sick. Like, takes me right back to what I knew was kind of under the surface there. So anyways, what was the other aspect of your question about what could help? Is that what it was? What could be different in order to build trust, create an environment for trust?
I think I was just specifically asking if there was any solutions you saw that when you do have that many people who have mental issues in one space, if you saw any solution to that, because obviously we do need spaces for them to be able to come together.
Yes, I have very specific things about that. I think that emergency shelters for single people, the women and men, need to be in separate facilities. Whatever they got to do that, they need to go to 2 different places. The women should not be around the men, period. No exceptions. Given the what was available at the time, I think that privacy screens, like the ones that they erect, like temporary ones for offices or whatever, that maybe like if you stood up, you could see over it, but underneath, when you're laying down, you have a sense of privacy. Absolutely, absolutely. I came out of that experience wanting to be able to sit in a sheltered place and look at a wall. Like I just wanted the freedom to sit and for there to be a wall near me. I know that may sound odd, but just not being in a living room, like if one of the things that my community didn't do that I would have been very therapeutic is just taking turns and welcoming me in their home and having a meal and just giving me time to sit in a place that was peaceful, or I could just be alone and safe, knowing that random people were not going to interact with me. That was one of the things that happened on a day-to-day. When I was in my car, everyone knew that I was homeless. It didn't take a very long time to know that I was living in my car. And so people would interact with you based on that. And you just develop this profound sense of no privacy at all. Everybody knows what you're doing, and yet no one knows you. That's a terrible place to be. No privacy and completely no one understanding who you are. And sorry.
So that more people haven't heard and understood what you shared with us just now. I've also had a number of encounters and can articulate quite a bit of what you articulated for folks who haven't had any other option. And being male embodied, I've realized my role is really to try to be and to create a safer space. There's a whole, especially, the recognition that there's more than just the 2 genders. There's more than what the world has treated us. And yet it's so much of that. We were talking before you got on about the need to unlearn. And in a lot of cases that's violence, and especially between genders and class, just the whole class warfare and the level of, oh no, I'm a successful person game that, I don't know if anyone here has seen Black Mirror, but there's a great episode called Nosedive. And in, the course of this one, and it's sort of the use of technology, but it's also that social standing, a lot of stuff that you really keenly articulated is where I feel like reverse usage of, a more compassionate, I put it in the chat there, this idea of kind of like like you said, like a crisis resume. Being able to speak for your own shadows is a lot more than you'll see the people in the ivory tower able to do. Like that level of maturity is forced upon you. If you're a mother, you're all of a sudden having it forces an evolution of spirit, which a mental breakdown, any number of the things that can happen all the time, happening at accelerated rates out there. And so I feel like it's important that your story be told, and that it's told in a way that allows for the rush of other experiences to be sort of per location even shared, heard, and understood. Something I've done personally in all the places that I've created, hubs or networks, is this basic formula of the churches, the food pantries, the existing resources, the places to camp. If you're not, like you said, if you didn't have that data plan, you wouldn't, knowledge is power. And there's a lot that we can do, knowledge of self and knowledge of space, and being able to see the value in one another and having systems that support that and support our honest tellings of stories. And that it's in that reframing and the retelling of the story, that it's not just what happened to you, you're identified in that way, but it's really, I'm so grateful that, you've able to survive this and to be this bright, sparkling person who can bring light to those dark places. And that's really the work that's needed. So thank you.
Thank you so much. That was so perfect. Such a perfect reflection of what it's like as an outsider, someone who wants to help but doesn't really know. I think you have a tremendous grasp on how to view someone's crisis. And you're asking the right questions on how can I help? One thing that I have reflected on with my interactions, particularly with my church, was that there were people who spoke good things into my life that never questioned that I could come through this. And my interactions with them would go something like, "Good morning, how are you? It's so good to see you. I'm so glad you're here. How are you doing?" At that kind of interaction's awesome. The other interactions sort of like looking you up and down, avoiding you. You can tell when someone's just, and then the halo of, oh God, she's talking again and she won't shut up and I can't help her and how do I get out of this? There are people who are healthy and whole who can look at you and impart something beautiful and good and walk away from you graciously, without maybe even giving you anything at all, but making you feel valued in that moment. That's priceless. I can't tell you how important that is, because I work as an educator now, and I know that I impart value to the people that I work with and the students that I'm in relationship with. It's incredible how important it is for us as humans to impart. Sorry, I got to shut my window. As humans, we need to impart value in our interactions with one another. Just very simply, that's what we need to do. And our society, particularly with respect to entertainment, is very conflict-based. All of our entertainment is about people fighting, this crisis and interacting in a confrontational way. Like, that's our entertainment. If our entertainment isn't showing people imparting value to one another, if that's not entertaining enough, like, we're just teaching how to stay in conflict with one another. And if a crisis evolves, how are you going to fight your way out of it? That has not been my life experience. But I've never been able to fight my way out of a situation. It's always been about understanding and graciousness and stepping back and being patient with one another and reflecting silently, which you can imagine I have a hard time doing. I'm very verbal. But I know that that's a blessing, to certain situations. Like this one, if I wasn't articulate, I wouldn't be able to answer your questions. And clearly I've reflected on it enough to be able to give something to you, I think is valuable. I'm ready to talk about Erin. Are we ready to go there?
Yeah, have you recorded your story? I don't know if we recorded this, but I just want to put it out there to do that.
I haven't done that, and I believe Nikki told me that she's recording this.
Yeah, it's recorded.
Yeah.
Recording.
I know, I'm excited too. I hope I have that. I don't know how to have access to that sort of thing, but I really do want access. So my meeting Erin, again, incredibly fortuitous. I had built a relationship with a family at my church, and she's a very flawed person, but we connected. And she loved my kids. She loved the way that I interacted with them when I was with them. And she wanted to help. She absolutely was like, I got to help you. I don't know how, but I'm going to help you. And so I briefly stayed in my church parking lot after the shelters closed, and then they kicked me out. That was awful and traumatic. And at that time, my friend in the church said, well, you can come park your car in front of our house. And so I did that. Now, she's one of those people who watches your every move, and you know that she's watching you, and that feels terrible. I don't think that she understands how terrible that feels. She still kind of, that's how she interacts with the world, actually. And I know other people have felt that from her. Nobody wants to feel like you're watching them and you've got your little list and you're writing your observations down and then are going to and then say something to that person about it. Like I always knew, well, what's she going to talk to me about now? I could see her mental tablet being filled, and I know I'm going to hear about it. That absolutely undermines any sort of security that you have in a relationship that you're building. Don't recommend it. You want to be as like poker face as possible and just imparting value and to that person in your interaction. You have to be very conscious of whatever anxieties you're having about the interaction. Just push it down and keep smiling. It's almost customer service. I don't know how else to describe it. It really is just eye contact, smile. How can I help you? So I ended up having a breaking point with this person. She was just overwhelmed. The way I was talking about my crisis, the way I interacted with the world was too much for her. And it was the 4th of July. She told me that, okay, you're going to need to leave, but stay for this celebration and then you have to go. And Erin came. And there she was. That's when she asked me to house sit for her. And I was like, house sit for you? Yes. I'll be behind some walls. I'll have some privacy. Be glad to do that. And that began our relationship. Eventually I was sleeping in a cot behind her couch with a little barrier. God bless Erin. I mean, seriously. I'm not going to say that our relationship was rosy all the time. It was not. But I love her family and her kids. And my daughter and I, to this day, we love her dog, Lola. We're so in love with Lola, even to this day. And we want to adopt a dog just like her, It was such a great experience. When I started, when her kids were there, like was gone with her kids and she came back. Erin just happens to have 2 boys and a girl like I do. And my son, I have one son still in Pennsylvania. And then I have my son and daughter out here. They're the same ages roughly as Erin's boys and her daughter. So my kids will come and actually stay at Erin's, which I hadn't stayed overnight with my kids since they had moved out. So that was such a blessing. Like the compatibility of our lives in that moment was so great. And at that time, Erin was practicing a no meat kind of discipline in her home. So I know that was hard for her. She kind of accepted the fact that I was going to be eating meat and preparing meat. And that was hard for her. And I could tell that Erin had come out of an experience where she had been in crisis with her personal crisis and had gotten to a point where she had stability in her home life with her kids. And she had made very conscious decisions about who she was, how she was going to live, and how she supported her kids. I wasn't there yet at all. But as an observer, watching her, how she interacted with her kids, the responsibility that she promoted in their lives, that the individual, the autonomy and the personal growth was really remarkable. I hadn't seen that in other relationships. So she modeled for me a lot of healthy choices. And when we would have conversations, the way I talked about it was very negative. I was in a very dark space. And she was continually like, okay, conversation over, bye, because she couldn't handle that darkness. She had already made her deal with living in light. And it was very hard for her to experience that darkness that I still carried with me. And so we found our ways of connecting that were healthy I think for both of us. I spent a lot of time hanging out with her kids and playing games. And that, to this day, was some of the best times that I had. And I got a sense from her kids that they enjoyed it too. And that really gave value to me. That made me feel good. Erin, I don't know if you're aware of this, but when I left from the trip to Pittsburgh, towards the end of my stay with Aaron, I actually went back to Pittsburgh to get some furniture, some things that I had left there. I had about a 3-week trip. And then when I came back, it was clear that I was on my way to get my own place. While I was away, I didn't have a definitive return date because I drove. And Aaron's kids called me and they were like, "When are you coming back?" And I was so touched. I was like, well, they miss playing games with me. I miss it too. So I was very cheered by that phone call. When I came back, I knew that I was in a different position, and Aaron's kids, her particular oldest, was kind of done with me, and they needed a sense of an end date. And so that time came when I found a place to live, and I was in a unique position. My mom had died, and I had inherited some money. So a lot of people don't have that. I was lucky I had that. And my aunt and uncle co-signed on a studio apartment for me. And then there ended up being some conflict, and the estate took a long time to resolve. And that's a different story altogether. But that was profoundly unique. It is very hard to find housing here. As a very sick person, I knew even with money, I wasn't going to be able to rent a room in someone's home. I didn't know how to function really healthy in another person's home. And, Erin probably remembers some of that. Like, I had a hard time functioning in her home, and she had definite rules, unspoken or spoken, that I either had to figure out and comply with or try to understand. It was hard for me. I was still a little feral, and it was hard for me. When I finally did get into housing, so stressful, even though there was money to pay all the bills, just putting the utilities in my name, I almost was like, no electricity, there won't be any. It's okay. I can live without it, It's crazy how reassuming, taking on new responsibilities, you really got to ease into that. Once I did establish everything and I was in that home, I dropped off the planet for like a year. I didn't go to church. I didn't interact with anybody. I needed that privacy. It was crazy how I needed that privacy. But again, my darkness was with me, and it ultimately created the social phobia, that isolation. I found that when I just walking to the dumpster to throw my garbage out was traumatic. It was crazy. When you are not around people for a long time, it amplifies your mental illness. It does not make it better. I'm excited about what you guys are doing and learning more of that, because one of the things I found to be the most therapeutic that I experienced in my home before I came out here was being out in the yard and gardening. I didn't grow anything, but I was pulling up weeds. I would go out there and I'd weed my lawn, and I would have these conversations in my mind. I called it talking to the grass. And I was like, yeah, I can talk to the grass because it doesn't talk back, It's not insulting me back. It's not questioning my value or my decision making, Why I was out there pulling weeds, particularly poison ivy. I had a huge stand of poison ivy I had to get rid of. It was so therapeutic. I'd lose track of time. I would be out there for 5-6 hours, and my kids would be like, Mom, we want to eat. I'm like, I'll be in a minute. 2 hours later, I finally come in. So I really think that this whole idea of farming and therapeutic gardening, giving someone a way to work and grow things and nurture life, but also for them experiencing the privacy of that. Gardening tends to be a kind of a solitary thing. It can be a communal thing, but you have your own little patch, and you grow something and you nurture that's between you and that the earth. It's a relationship with the earth. That's exciting. If you can develop a program that enables people to have some privacy, have a sense of community, very basic community roles that allow someone to experience privacy immediately so that it becomes sanctuary. They need to experience sanctuary and safety first, and then build things positively a little bit at a time. You'd be surprised at how much time people need to be left alone before they feel okay again. And the longer they're out there, the longer they're going to need to be left alone, be given a very minimal number of expectations in order to feel safe enough to stay. Because the moment they start feeling a little bit violated or feel like they can't trust the process, they're just going to go back to what they know, and what they know is the street, and they have their little haunt, their little routine of gathering recyclables or whatever, the food pantry that they go to. So you're always going to fight against what people have used to survive, and enabling people to discover within themselves a capacity to survive again in a healthy way. So I was in this house, and I couldn't function in society. It was crazy. I was like, how am I going to do this? Well, I ran out of money and food, so I started going to a food bank, first as a participant and then as a volunteer. My experience as a participant, particularly with my church's food bank, was pretty negative. The lady that runs it, she runs a tight ship, and she has no time for your story or your explanations. She's just like, you do this way, that's it, don't talk to me. That's kind of her nature. She has a zero bullshit kind of attitude, and she's seen enough, particularly of the way people are naturally more manipulative when they're desperate. I want you to revisit that idea when you're thinking about desperate people. There is a natural sort of manipulation that comes out of that. And I don't think that it's anything that no one's intentionally trying to be guarded about the information they're giving you. It just, I think it's a natural occurrence. So I had this very profound conflict with this woman at this food bank. She was the person who actually kicked me out of the church parking lot when I ended up sleeping in my car. And then that time between being in the church parking lot and then staying outside of a friend's house. So she's kind of like the person that the church has that fields is kind of a go-between the desperate people and the church. And she has her reasons, and I understand it, but she was very heavy-handed with me. She still is, and I don't like it. I don't think you have to be heavy-handed with people to help them to enforce boundaries. People kind of need to know why you have those rules. They need the dignity of an explanation sometimes. She was never really willing to do that. So I started volunteering at this food bank, which was so much better than lining up. Again, the lining up, it reminded me so much of what it was to line up outside of a food bank, a shelter with all the people who are trying to get in the shelter. It's a bunch of very desperate, unhealthy people gathered and waiting. It's just like, it's such a bad recipe for human interaction. So in particular, when I was standing in line for this food bank, there were a couple men who would come up and talk to me, and I did not want it. And there was no one to protect me from it. I had to be extremely rude to these men to get them away from me. And that's awful, awful, awful. I can't tell you how awful that is for a single woman to be constantly afraid that men are going to approach them and not respect their boundaries. So eventually I started volunteering, and that was life-changing. Volunteering, being a part of a team of people, doing good, caring for one another. This was the first group of people that were happy to see me every day. And they didn't have any real expectations for me. Mostly it was understood, let's be positive, let's be friendly, let's listen to the directions that were given and follow them. And that became both a place where I experienced dignity and I can't speak enough about people who are happy to see you. It's so huge. Eye contact, a smile. How are you doing? Remembering their name. It's so profound. And I know that that's the case. I think that's the case for most of us when we interact with the world. The people who can give that to us, they have our loyalty almost instantly, our trust almost instantly. So this community of people, amazing, amazing. Other than the person who's a little rough, who is actually the who runs the whole thing. Everybody else is profound, just beautiful, loving, supportive people. And I called them my food bank family. And these people single-handedly rehabilitated me to the workforce. It took a long time, but when I started applying for jobs and when I started to kind of debrief from my work experiences with them, that's what kept me going. You know, I was afraid I was going to get fired. I straight up was just afraid. I was like, this is bad thing's going to happen. I'm barreling straight for it. I don't know how to stop it. And I did. I worked for the Dollar Tree and I lost that job. I didn't get fired in some sort of humiliating way. They just stopped putting me on the schedule. I worked for a women's clothier for a while too. And I did get fired from there from just inconsistently being on time. Learning how to be on time is a huge skill. And when you're mentally ill, and I have ADHD as well. So for me, time has always been conceptual and a complete lack of awareness of how long it takes me to do something and being ready and responsible for showing up on time. And that is such a huge job skill. And not having it, the worst. So I learned that with the food bank too. They're like, if you don't get here by 9 o'clock, you can't volunteer. Sorry, they shut the door, and they will come out and they'll be like, sorry, you can't volunteer today. Go get in line. And I was always like, so dramatic, you know. I'm like, but what? I had all these excuses for being late. I'm like, you can't do this to me. It was so crazy. People have to learn how to be on time. And I think they can learn that without being heavy-handed. Supporting people to build these basic vocational skills is critical. It's hard to learn those things. I've overcome my chronic tardiness, and I do have some, basic ideas on how to do that too. The one thing,
Elizabeth, one thing really quick, I just want to insert, because you taught me something that was really valuable that I think about often. Okay. You told me at one point to stop shoulding you. And, like, whether it's like, you should file this paper, you should take a shower, you should cook, use this other cutting board. But the way the languaging around it was so important, because on one hand you can try to help facilitate in someone the ability to find their strengths to grow, or you can be heavy-handed or just non-helpful if it's communicated in a way that makes someone feel less than or like they're not enough, and that just reinforces shame or the feeling of hopelessness or some it makes it harder. It's putting a backpack of expectation on someone's back when they're trying to walk up a hill of self-improvement. And that was majorly eye-opening for me, because I was like, what do you mean shoulding you? Well, I'm just telling you like how it is. This is just, if if you live in this house, this is how we live in this house. Or if you're at a job and they're saying, well, you have to do this. I think you're making a really good point about the compassion around it and being able to help someone in a way that doesn't add burden. Your ability to articulate is wonderful, and I'm grateful for the feedback you gave me and how to interact with someone who needs help in a way that's actually helpful and not creating more challenge. And that's something I think you can contribute a lot to this group as we set up, and it's already, gosh, such a great community of people that, you know, nonviolent communication, I think, is a central element of how we gather here in this space, and just holding space, being open and learning, and not shooting on shooting all over people. So that's definitely just a pin I wanted to put into it, because I think that's kind of woven through a lot of your experiences. Is people want to help, but if the help is coming in the form of judgment or expectation, or like setting up some like, you must do this in order to be accepted, and to be able to give what you're going to give, you also have to give these things, and those aren't things that are always readily available in someone's toolbox, depending on where they're at.
You'd be surprised at how empty your toolbox is when you're at the bottom, you know, and you have to build it slowly, and you don't even know which ones to work on first, you know. And I think that's where a supportive, non-judgmental community of people around you, and whomever is helping you needs to be partnered with other people. You got to have a plan, and reflect with one another about, okay, it seems like this is an area that they're willing or ready to work on. How can we support them to do that? All the interactions, every single one is cumulative, and it can be positive. You can start piling up these, you know, positive experiences, and that how nurturing that is, because every single time a negative one happens, the pile goes down again, because you have to use it in order to combat that one negative experience. I want to articulate that a little bit more because of the work that I do now. I work as a paraeducator in the Pomona Unified School District. I am there to support disabled children, particularly autistic children. There's a new movement in schools called Positive Behavior Intervention and Support, and it is amazing. It was not how I was schooled, and the main thing that they talk about is positive interactions, and it's a trickle-down thing. It's about management and people in the highest level of responsibility interacting with one another with dignity and respect, and speaking positive, empowering things into one another's lives. And by modeling that, they are teaching the next tier, and the next tier being supportive staff like cafeteria workers, myself, the janitorial staff, the people who keep, you know, the people who handle technology, those people. That they're the next tier, and then the last tier being the students. So you spend a lot of time, even years, entire school years, modeling it before you implement a list of expectations for the students. So what I've learned out of that, and I've had multiple trainings on it, it all pretty much boils down to the ratio of 5 positive statements versus 1 kind of redirection. And I don't want to say criticism, I don't want anything. It's all about making observations and offering support in an area that you see needs some work. And I've explained this a few times to people, and I like to say that it's amazing how quickly you can say to 5 things, 5 positive things. And like a typical customer service interaction might go something like this. good morning or good afternoon. It's so nice to see you. That's two things. Three, eye contact, a smile, and a greeting. And if you include their name, that's even more profound. And then saying something like, I'm really glad to see you. And then something else, I love how you're always on time and ready to work. Your positive attitude just really makes my experience here so enjoyable. And then you could say something like, one thing I noticed is that you seem to be struggling with this promotion we're offering in the store. And maybe you're struggling because you don't really understand how it works. How can I help you with that? So that's a criticism based on an observation you made about them either not fulfilling that direction, responding to that direction, but you're not saying it in a way that makes them feel like they're incapable and that they're failing. Supportive language is not impossible. It is something that we as a society we can reframe any criticism in a supportive way. And we have to keep that ratio high, 5-to-1. If you're going to earn access to me in a constructive way, you need to acknowledge me in at least 5 positive ways before I will let you offer a criticism or a direction that I will adopt in my heart. And if you show me that you respect and value me, I will be loyal and I will want to do the thing that you're asking of me. I found at the jobs I worked at Kmart for a long time, the managers that are super critical, you avoid them and your loyalty goes down the toilet. You have to keep your own set of ethics as a person wherever you go, but they really can poison the well, and negative people poison the well. And people who struggle with mental illness, their well is poisoned by themselves. And so, people who interact with them in a positive, supporting way are like fresh water, and nourishing and life-giving. And that's doable. I think that's doable as a society. But we have to unlearn all the criticism and all the self-hatred that we struggle with. That's pretty much it. My food bank experience, volunteering in a healthy community, even an unhealthy one, honestly, but volunteering helps rehabilitate you for work again. And then when I started working, I worked at the school district and at Kmart. And for me, the idea of keeping busy, staying out of trouble was critical. I didn't need any time to myself to think about how much my life sucks compared to other people, how much of a failure I am compared to my peers. I just needed hard work. I needed sustained busyness to keep me from hating myself, honestly. The paycheck was nice too, but just having a full schedule really helped me. It built internal strength, and that's what you have to learn how to do. And now I'm working I had 2 jobs working with disabled students, and it's so profound that I feel so blessed that I'm working in a way that I am giving back, particularly giving back to families who are in crisis. And it's a crisis I am familiar with. As a single mom, I really can identify with so many of these families and these kids, this population. So my life experience is actually being utilized, and that's great. That's so fulfilling, and I think that's all what we all strive for in our work, I'm going to mute me for a second. I can hear you guys because my daughter wants to talk to me. Alrighty, so my daughter actually needs to use my computer at 1:15, but I can switch over to my phone. How would that work? I mean, how does that work for you guys?
That works just fine.
Are we ready to wrap up, or I'm ready to get any feedback and answer any questions. I think I've kind of said everything that I have for you.
I think at least for me, I get a lot of inspiration and a lot of kind of ideas what we need to implement on our retreat centers to provide people with the most comfortable and impactful spaces. So it was absolutely great. Thank you for sharing your story, Elizabeth. And I really loved your energy too. And I want to invite you in our chat. And I really want to stay in touch. And maybe, and I don't believe in coincidence, so for sure, we will be. We can create something useful in this world together. So I'd love you to join us in WhatsApp.
I'm so excited.
Yeah. It's yeah, I can feel it right away.
Me too. Yeah, I want to be involved with whatever you're doing, and I have the time and space to do it. I've actually been paid to do nothing, and both my jobs have been paying me to stay at home, which is a sort of craziness itself, honestly. It's important, it's therapeutic to give back to the world, and when you don't know how to do that, it's debilitating. It brings that crazy right back like a freight train into your life, you know? So I have the time and space and desire to do something with my experience. And I honestly, I haven't known what to do with it. My pastors have talked to me about having me as a resource on how they can develop an attitude and a kind of a common and consistent way to respond to the homeless as they encounter them. So that's definitely going to happen for me. It hasn't happened yet. But I want to be a part of whatever you're doing. You guys seem like an amazing team of people. I'm excited to hear more about what you're doing and what you're developing.
Thank you. And
I'm just so privileged to be a part of this. Thank you, Erin. I'm so glad you still think of me, you know, in that positive way. I really do too.
You taught me a lot. I mean, that time I feel like I had just kind of gone through a lot of stuff and decided where I was going to be. And then after you left, I went through other challenges, but there were so many lessons that it just learning about, you know, my impact on others in a more meaningful way, beyond like, okay, I'm going to get control of my life. Then how do I be around others in a way that helps them and doesn't harm them? It was such a wonderful time of growth for me, and I draw literally that don't like stop shooting me, that stuck in my head as such a helpful lesson. And you're so vibrant and talented and creative and articulate, and for you to have the autonomy and self-direction and be able to apply those gifts, talents, and skills and share your experiences, that's such an awesome thing. And when I was getting to know Nika and Justin and hearing more about what they're doing and some of the thoughts and ideas they have, I thought you would be such a great voice in that conversation to be able to bring value and shine light on things that we don't know that we don't know. And so I'm really grateful that you were willing to share so openly and graciously with us your experience and some of the insights that you've gleaned. And I know that you'll continue to share more with us. So thank you.
It's been such a pleasure to revisit that time in my life. I have enough distance on it now that I have both perspective and kind of an emotional security when talking about it. The time is right, and I'm just profoundly grateful to you, Erin, for thinking of me and including me. And today, talking about it again with you, I feel so safe and respected and appreciated, and that's so profound. I'm going to take this experience into my return to work, and it's going to impact already I feel the healing in my spirit about my worth and what I have to offer the world. Wow,
Mhm.
so incredible. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd just like to offer a quick meditation for all of us to, hold you, Elizabeth, in our hearts, and Aaron and everybody out there, that, millions of people right now who are maybe encountering a similar life-changing situation where they could either share or open up their space in some way, and or open that bridge to say, here's what I need, here's where I'm at, here's what I'm going through. And what I would like to distill and invite us to meditate and conjure is, how do we make it so people don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things that you learned the hard way, and what would you have wanted, and what can we, as design professionals and facilitators of spaces and people who can extend these conversations, what would you have wanted? Like what could have been there, and how can how can we maybe facilitate that, and just to sort of hold space for this isn't like, on some level you've completed a certain arc. You're back to your sense of self. And for those who haven't had that bubble pop yet, or the American dream just popped, or whatever it is that's popping, just to hold space for all those who could benefit from what you've shared, from a lot of the visions and dreams that the people here on this call have had and are working towards. So, thank you again. It's so important to have diverse perspectives in these conversations.
Yeah, and in my dialogue with my church, and what we talk about a lot is that God doesn't waste our hurt. That there's something to be gained. And I'm grateful for the traumatic experiences that I've had, because they've given me an awareness and a compassion for the population that I love so much. And I think that's true in our lives, that whatever challenges we experience, even in the deep, darkest places that we never thought we could get out of, when we do heal, we have so much more to give, because we absolutely know in life, crisis is going to happen to all of us. We are all going to face disease and disaster in some form. And so we need people around us, and we need to be the kind of people who can tangibly help one another, support one another into a healthier place. And you guys, you have a handle on it. You know exactly what you're doing. That's so reassuring that there are people out there who are talking together, bringing their individual healthiness to make collective profound. Like, it's exponential when healthy people get together and set upon themselves to help the world. It's incredible.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm pretty certain my daughter wants to use my computer right about now.
All right, guys. Nice talking to you. I gotta run too. Elizabeth, if you want to join us on Monday morning or next Thursday, we do some breath work, exercise, and meditation. And then we each work on our own individual thing for 2 sessions of 25 minutes with some convo and, mostly focused on the work, but like, I'm going to work on this, and then we do it, and then, there's some accountability and support and feedback or whatever it is we're needing. We can be quiet and just have a shared space to sit and work on our individual stuff with some nice music and friends. So I invite you to join us, and Nika will share a link with you. And if someone could copy the chat, my phone kept disconnecting, so I've lost all the fun notes and stuff throughout this. So if anyone sent me a direct message,
Yeah, I copied it.
send it on.
I haven't seen.
I don't have it.
I haven't seen any of the chat annotations. Let me look.
Yeah, there is a lot. I copied it all, so I can share it.
Yeah, if you could, I don't have it either.
Yeah, maybe add Elizabeth to the WeChat, and then we can paste the notes from this call in there. So we both got it.
The only information I have for you is that my school is starting back for summer school next week. So I don't know what the hours are, but there's going to be very specific times that I'm committed to that group. And that is the summer school is going to go for 3 weeks, and then I'm pretty much free. My timing is any old time at that point. But the next 3 weeks are pretty. I have some pretty high commitments. Okay.
Cool.
Okay,
Love-
thank you guys.
So you'll have my contact information.
Sorry?
Do you have a way to contact me? I know Erin does, but
I have
can you
your
share?
messenger. Do you want to tell someone your phone number?
Yeah, I'm trying to
Add you
see
in the
if
group.
I can. There isn't an obvious place for me to add text. Here, I'm going to click on chat and see if that does it. Oh, okay. So I'm going to give you guys my contact information, okay?
Great. While you're doing that, I'll mention that I'd love to. I had one more question, but I think it's best to save it for another time.
Okay.
Sorry, just cutting out. Were you talking about this?
Yeah, I think Elizabeth is frozen though.
Oh, that's
Oh, there you are. Okay, cool. Yeah, I have one more question, but I think it'll be good for another call. Would be having to do with the process of government opportunities and signing up and filling out forms and finding what's available and all that. But I think definitely not for today. But I'd love to ask you more about that on a future call. And then I just wanted to take a moment to say, 5 good things and just how much I appreciate sharing this and all the energy you bring and the articulation and maturity and that feeling that you mentioned through church of feeling that this is for a reason, or that like I can so feel into that, just the amount of special you have to give to the world. So thank you.
so excited. And yep, you guys have my contact information. Can't wait to hear from you and see your beautiful faces again.
Thank
Well,
you.
Lucy, thank you for letting us feel you for a little bit.
My pleasure. Absolute. It's such a gift to me today. And have a wonderful day with your endeavors. I'm excited for you and who you are.
See you soon.
Thank you so
Thanks,
much.
Bye, guys.
Have a beautiful
Bye,
day,
everyone.
guys.
Love you guys.
Bye.